Luke and I met in December of 2022 after he moved from New York to pursue a career as a cinematographer. Luke played rugby his whole life and began lifting weights in 2018 to get stronger for his sport. After working together, he expressed an interest in signing up for a local USPA meet, the Northwest Power Cup, in March of 2023. I was excited. Luke was my age when I started training. We're in the same weight class and have very similar proportions. It'd be the closest I'd get to programming myself at that age. Luke just looked like someone who had never had coaching but was bull strong when I got my hands on him, and I was excited to get started. Luke is very responsive to higher rep training, much to his dismay, and he's always been a big fan of singles, but more often than not, they've limited his ability to progress. Where running blocks with higher rep work on his competition exercises always seems to create bigger jumps when we go back to blocks that focused on higher intensity. Luke's first prep ran like a pretty typical block periodization program does. We started with a 4-week hypertrophy block, a 4-week strength block, and then finally a 4-week peak. Luke had a big jump in E1RM between the hypertrophy and strength block, and I went, well, obviously this is going to go well. The last 4 weeks of training just looked extremely fatigued, and Luke was starting to experience some low back pain that was limiting his ability to deadlift. My answer at that time was to just stick to the game plan. Fast forward to the meet in March, having done a steep taper, and Luke's warm-up looked fresher than they had, but not like I was expecting them to. Luke ended the day tying a squat PR of 185 kg, a bench PR of 117.5 kg, and a deadlift PR of 237.5 kilo. I was left feeling as though I had let him down as a coach, not having answers for what I had felt gone wrong during his prep. Later that year, I finished reading the RTS manual and became fascinated with RPE stops in particular, and not programming specific sets or volume caught my attention as a new lever to pull on in training. I changed my programming from something like a by 3 at 8, reduce weight by 10%, and repeat 3s until 9 is achieved. And that gave me new ways to track progress through a block by watching how many sets he could repeat, and realizing that I was often programming too much volume for competition exercises. Equally, I took advantage of his work capacity because rugby is such an endurance-based sport. I knew he was going to be able to tolerate higher rep sets than most people his size, and so we started experimenting with that ahead of his meet in October that same year. Luke's numbers started to jump up, especially his squat and deadlift. He was very responsive to by 10s at 9 on back squat and AMRAPs with 70 to 75% on deadlift. Much to his protest, I could see performance improvements in his E1RM, as well as his technical mastery of the lifts. Equally, I knew to prioritize this as the bulk of his training in the second to last block. I also knew I could pull back on how many sets at a higher intensity he needed because of the RPE stops. 8 weeks out, Luke started playing rugby for a local team, and it played a role in his ability to come in and prep. I knew to pull back training and dialed his RPE on his primary lifts because I knew his joints as well as recovery were going to be affected. About a week out, Luke got kicked in the leg during a game, and it made it difficult to walk or stand, which gave me a heart attack, but the work was done, and we decided to do a low taper. Luke competed in October and had a meet where he and I were both really proud, squatting 205 kg for a 20 kilo PR, benching 122.5 for a 5 kilo PR, and deadlifting 250 kilo for a 12.5 kilo PR. Recently, Luke has been prepping for a local deadlift event, and I have implemented a much more focused emerging strategies approach. When I say that, I mean I have looked at the protocols that have worked for us historically and the sequence that they've occurred in to guide my decision-making process in building his prep. He has had a tremendously successful prep, most recently pulling an RPE PR of 240 kg at RPE 8, as well as a rep PR of 205 kg for 7. Luke is an absolute treat of a human being, extremely positive and excited to see everyone. He has been a heart attack to work with, injuring his thumb, shoulder, and ankle between training sessions and at rugby practice. We laugh about it often, but Luke has been one of my most dedicated and consistent lifters, and I've been impressed with how much he has matured as a lifter since we've met.